This is a sermon from St. Paul's Church, Brookfield, Connecticut, transforming lives through Jesus. For more information, go to www.stpaulsbrookfield.com.
Well, the year was 1984. Ronald Reagan was just completing his first term in office. The Olympic Games were being held and being boycotted by the Soviets in Los Angeles. And believe it or not, my Washington Commanders were really good at football. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? When at the ripe old age of 44, my age now, by the way, Tina Turner made her worldwide comeback by belting these immortal words. Whoa, whoa, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? Yeah. Well, just keep that in mind when you hear Rebecca sing a different love song later this evening, right? But, 42 years have passed since then. But tonight, here at St. Paul's, we are finally going to give Miss Turner an answer. Tonight, we are with Jesus in the upper room. This is the night, as we say each week, in which Jesus was handed over to suffering and death. The night in which he will break bread and pass the cup at his last supper. The focus of the supper will be Jesus' last words to his disciples, his final instructions to them before he walks the way of the cross tomorrow. And the high point of his last words are our gospel reading for this evening. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. Tonight is the night that we call Maundy Thursday because it's the night that we remember this commandment. Maundy from the Latin mandatum, which literally means commandment. From this night forward, this one command will become the one defining word, the all-encompassing mission statement for all who would follow Christ. Love. Love. So St. Paul will say that we can speak in tongues of angels. We can know everything there is to be known on heaven and on earth. We can have every spiritual gift, and we can give away everything that we own. But if we don't have love, it means nothing. We are nothing. Love is our one calling. Love itself, our creed. What's love got to do with it? Well, love, Jesus says on this night, love is everything. Everything. The problem is, and this was something Miss Turner knew intimately, the problem is that we live in a world in which that word love is highly abused, don't we? We live, that is, in a world where half of all marriages end in divorce. A world where 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men are victims of domestic violence. That's 20 instances in the U.S. on average per minute, for anyone keeping track. We also live in a world where the primary posture that we have toward our neighbors is not that of, say, the Good Samaritan, but rather is one of fear or anger or greed or indifference. No wonder Miss Turner resigned to believing that love is nothing more than a second-hand emotion. It seems that in such a world, the best we can offer are the kind of trite epithets that saturate Hollywood movies and pop music, such that the best things we find ourselves saying about what love is are the kind of slushy or saccharine sweet feelings that mark those pages. The kind of feeling that, despite its sweetness, cannot sustain good marriages. The kind of feeling that, as we've said, is so self-centered that it will break out in vicious ways when its needs aren't being met. This is not, right? This is not love. But neither, I hasten to add, are many of the ways that some of us try to fix what is broken. A few years back, I did some field work on this question, and I took a straw poll of what people thought the word love meant. And for the most part, the answers were somewhat esoteric. In general, people tended to describe love in ways that sounded almost like a generic sense of goodwill that everyone should have for everyone else. The most common synonym given for love was tolerance. Now, please don't mishear me. Tolerance is not a bad thing, but it is not love. You know, imagine a husband coming home to his wife and announcing, "Honey, I tolerate you," right? Love, so defined, is actually a kind of absence, the absence of some of the bad things that I just mentioned. But because of that, it's also the kind of thing that you can do while being absent. You can tolerate someone from across the street, or across town, or across the world. And you can tolerate somebody without doing anything for them, without ever even meeting them. But what's love got to do with that? The answer, to put it plainly, is not much. Now, I've talked a lot so far about what love is not. Love, we said, is not having a generic sense of goodwill that all people can have for everyone. And neither is it the kind of syrupy sweetness that you hear on the pages of Hollywood movie scripts. But if love is not a secondhand emotion, then this begs the question, and perhaps we can think of Ms. Turner's question this way. What is love? What is love if not a secondhand emotion? Well, the answer, I think, can be found if we come back to the upper room. Now, there's three details I want us to note as we sit with Jesus around the table this evening. The first comes in the very first verse of our gospel reading. And there, John writes that the context for this meal is the Passover, the story we read in our Old Testament lesson for this evening. That is to say that Jesus offers this new commandment in the midst of the Passover feast. Now, there's a lot that could be said about this connection to the Passover feast, but what I want to highlight is that the backdrop for this new commandment, to love one another, is the story of God's love for Israel. When Jesus says the word love, he doesn't mean it in the way that the people that I surveyed did, would not have thought of love as something abstract or something that you can do in general. Rather, as the basis for his language about God's love, Jesus would have been relying on his disciples' understanding of the covenant that God made with Israel. To say love in that context would have been to say something covenantal, would have been referring to the story of how God called Israel out of all the peoples of the earth to be his people. Jesus and his disciples would have been remembering on this night, out of all the nights of the year, that God had bound himself to a particular people out of all the peoples of the earth. That God had looked to this one people and said, you are my beloved. You, out of them all, are mine. Now, this is counterintuitive to us. Those of us trained to think of love as a kind of general form of goodwill that everyone should have for everyone else might be afraid that this kind of particular love might be a limit, a way of thinking that limits God's love. But stop and think about that for just a minute. Married folks in the room, let me ask you this. Does monogamy limit your ability to love? Right? Has committing yourself to a lifelong fidelity to one person somehow made you less loving? Husbands, I guess I'm picking on the husbands tonight, but maybe that's easier because I am one, right? Try not to look at my wife as I say this, right? But husbands, what do you think would happen to you if you said to your wife, honey, I love you with the same love that I have for every woman? Or worse, that I have the same generic form of goodwill for you that I have for everyone else. Wouldn't go too well, right? Now, there'll be more to say later about the universality of God's love. But the point here, the point we learn from God's covenantal relationship to Israel, is that a particular and binding covenant, binding love between lovers, is at the heart of what Jesus means when he says love. And we cannot say the word love as Jesus does in this commandment unless we have that kind of covenantal relationship in mind. Now, second, look at what Jesus says in verse 34 of our gospel reading. The command to love does indeed emerge out of this context of God's covenant with Israel, and yet something about it still leads Jesus to calling it new. New. And what is it that makes this old thing new? Well, Jesus puts it this way. We should not just love one another, but what does he say? We should love one another as he has loved us. And that's where things get really, really real, isn't it? This is where things get darn near frightening. Here's where we see not just a different kind of love, but a way of loving that turns all other conceptions of love upside down. Under the old covenant, Israel was bound to practice a kind of covenantal maintenance, bound, that is, to meet the demands of the law in order to maintain its relationship to God. And yet time and time again, Israel failed to keep the covenant, failed, that is, to bind themselves to God the way that God had bound himself to them. And if God had the kind of thin conceptions of love that we do, God might have broken the relationship at any of those points and discarded Israel and the whole world with them the same way that we discard people today. But listen, that is not the way that our God loves. Seeing that Israel and we could not keep our side of the bargain, God decided to complete this love himself. In Jesus, as verse 1 says, God loved us to the end. God had bound himself in covenantal love to his people, but we broke the bonds of God's love for us and went on our own way. Yet even though we had left God, God set everything aside and came to us. God went all the way to win us back. While we were still enemies of God, as St. Paul says, God in Jesus Christ donned a towel, knelt down at our feet, and chose to serve those who had rebelled against him. While we were still sinners, Paul says, Christ died for us. We're a long way from mere tolerance here, aren't we? We're a long way from just a second-hand emotion. But third and finally, remember, this is not just what Jesus has done for us. On this night, in this new command, this is what Jesus calls us to. As I have loved you, he says to us, so shall you love one another. Not with a sort of general affect, but by binding your lives to each other, by forgiving the other again and again when they wrong you, by taking the low road of humility and service and sacrifice, going all the way to win each other back. Just as I have loved you, Jesus says, so should you love one another. It is this love that is the defining word, the all-encompassing mission statement for all of us who would follow Christ. So a final word here in closing. In the last words of our gospel reading for this evening, Jesus says something remarkable. In a second counterintuitive turn, Jesus says that it is in this way that a love that started out as particular will become universal. It's precisely as we love each other in this way that the whole world, Jesus says, that the whole world will come to know who God is. It's precisely by showing each other this kind of upside-down love that we can turn the world right side up again. And I note this because we live in a world where we are surrounded by all sorts of other temptations. A world that says that might makes right. Where politicians, both inside and outside of the church, tell us that we must win at all costs, that we must use any means necessary to show that we are in the right or on the right side of history, whatever that phrase means. But to those who would say this, Jesus says no. To those who would say this, Jesus says, love. And so St. Paul's Church here in the upper room this Maundy Thursday, I want to turn this back to you. Look around the room this evening. Seriously, take a moment and look around at each other. And don't just stop with one person, right? Don't just scan. As you look around, look those you see in the eyes. And likely as you do this, you'll see some people you know quite well. Some others you know only casually. Maybe some others who are near strangers. And you may see some that you get along with very well. You may see others who you find a bit harder to deal with. You may even look up here and see a few lay ministers and priests, or if you look way in the back, you'll see our dear brother David Zen running sound in the live stream. And as you see these faces, I'm going to ask you a favor. It's a big favor, but it's one that I need to ask on this night of all the nights in the church year. Those people that you see, I'm going to ask that you love them. Love them. Not just a matter of general affect. I'm asking you to bind your life to theirs. I'm asking them to love them as Christ loves you. I'm asking you to serve them, sacrifice for them, and to lay down your life for theirs. Even when they are wrong. And even when they wrong you. We are called to make Christ known to this world. What's love got to do with that? Everything. Love is everything. Amen.